The court reporter literally stopped typing when my 12-year-old son stood up during our DNA hearing and asked his father, "Then why did you text mom saying I'm the best thing you ever made?" But let me tell you how we got to that courtroom in the first place, because this story isn't just about a paternity test. It's about how the people who are supposed to love you most can become your worst enemies, and how sometimes a child's courage can expose the truth that adults are too cowardly to face. My name is Sarah Collins, and I'm a 34-year-old elementary school teacher from Denver, Colorado. I teach second grade, which means I spend my days helping 7-year-olds learn to read and tying tiny shoelaces. I love my job because kids are honest in a way that adults have forgotten how to be. They don't lie about their feelings or manipulate situations for personal gain. If only I had remembered that lesson before I married into a family that specialized in both. This is my son, Marcus. He's 12 years old, loves soccer more than anything in the world, and has this incredible ability to remember every single detail of every conversation he's ever heard. Trust me, that detail becomes very important later. Marcus is one of those kids who notices everything but doesn't always speak up about it. He's got these warm brown eyes that light up when he talks about his favorite soccer player, and he's the kind of kid who still hugs his mom goodbye every morning before school, even though his friends think it's uncool. Then there's my ex-husband, David Chen. 36 years old, works as a corporate manager for a tech company, and used to be the man I thought I'd grow old with. David was the guy who cried when Marcus took his first steps, who coached his little league team for 3 years, and who used to read him bedtime stories every single night. He was also the man who looked me in the eye 8 months ago and said, "I'm done raising a kid that's not mine." But the real villain in this story is David's mother, Helen Chen. 62 years old, retired, and has made interfering in her son's life her full-time job since her husband died 5 years ago. Helen is one of those women who smiles sweetly while she's stabbing you in the back. She's the type who brings homemade cookies to every family gathering and then spends the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about your parenting, your cooking, or your life choices. Helen never liked me from the day David brought me home, but she tolerated me as long as I was making her son happy. The moment our marriage started having problems, she swooped in like a vulture circling wounded prey. Here's what you need to understand about family court. It's not like those dramatic TV shows where someone stands up and makes an emotional speech that changes everything. Real family court is sterile, cold, and filled with people in suits who shuffle papers and speak in legal jargon, while your entire life gets dissected like a science experiment. The day of our DNA hearing, I walked into that courtroom wearing my best black dress, the one I'd bought for job interviews, because I wanted to look professional and credible. I needed everyone in that room to see that I was a good mother fighting for her son's future. Marcus was supposed to wait outside with my sister, but the judge allowed him to be present since the case directly involved him. I'll never forget how small he looked sitting in that big wooden chair, his legs barely reaching the floor, wearing the button-down shirt I'd bought him specifically for this day. He was scared but trying to be brave, just like he always does when the adults in his life are falling apart around him. David sat across the room with his lawyer, refusing to make eye contact with either of us. He was wearing that navy blue suit I'd helped him pick out for his last promotion, and seeing him in it felt like being punched in the stomach. This was the man who used to slow dance with me in our kitchen while Marcus giggled and tried to dance between our feet. Now he was sitting 20 feet away trying to legally prove that the child we'd created together wasn't his responsibility. And Helen? She sat in the gallery behind David like she was attending a theater performance wearing her favorite pearl necklace and that satisfied smile she got whenever she thought she was winning. She had no idea that her grandson was about to destroy her carefully constructed lies with a single, devastating question. That's where our story really begins. To understand how we ended up in that courtroom, I need to take you back to the beginning, when David and I were actually happy. We met in college at the University of Colorado. I was studying education, and he was in business school. David was different then. He was this ambitious, thoughtful guy who would walk me to class and actually listen when I talked about my dreams of becoming a teacher. He wasn't the bitter, angry man you'll meet later in this story. We got married when I was 26 and he was 28, right after I landed my first teaching job at Meadowbrook Elementary. Our wedding was small but perfect, just our families and close friends in my parents' backyard. Helen seemed genuinely happy that day, or at least she was good at pretending. She even gave a speech about how lucky David was to find someone who would keep him grounded. Looking back, I think that was her first red flag about me, but I was too in love to notice the subtle dig. For the first few years, life was exactly what I'd dreamed of. David got promoted twice at his company, and I was loving my job teaching second grade. We bought a 3-bedroom house in Lakewood with a big backyard that David insisted we needed for the kids we're going to have. He was so excited about becoming a father that he started reading parenting books before I even got pregnant. When I found out I was carrying Marcus, David literally jumped up and down in our bathroom. I still have the video he took of us that day, both of us crying and laughing at the same time, holding that positive pregnancy test like it was made of gold. He immediately called his mom, and even Helen seemed genuinely thrilled about becoming a grandmother. She drove over that same evening with a bag full of baby clothes she'd been saving just in case. David was incredible during my pregnancy. He came to every single doctor's appointment, even when it meant leaving work early. He painted the nursery this soft blue color and spent weekends assembling the crib and changing table. He would talk to my belly every night, telling our unborn son about his day and making promises about all the things they'd do together. "We're going to play catch in the backyard," he'd say, "and I'm going to teach you to ride a bike, and we'll go camping every summer." When Marcus was born, David was the first one to hold him. I'll never forget the look on his face. Pure wonder and love. He whispered, "Hey there, little man. I'm your dad, and I'm going to take care of you forever." He meant it, too. For the first 8 years of Marcus's life, David was the dad every kid deserves. He coached Marcus's t-ball team when he was 5, taught him to swim at the community pool, and never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. Saturday mornings were their special time together. They'd make pancakes while I slept in, then spend hours in the backyard kicking a soccer ball around. David bought Marcus his first real soccer cleats for his 7th birthday, and Marcus wore them everywhere, even to bed sometimes. Our family traditions were simple but meaningful. Every Friday was pizza and movie night. Every Sunday, we'd go to the park and have picnics. David would push Marcus on the swings until his arms were tired, and then they'd play on the monkey bars together. I have hundreds of photos from those days. David and Marcus building sandcastles, roasting marshmallows over our backyard fire pit. David teaching Marcus to throw a football. Helen was part of our lives too, but in a manageable way. She'd come over for Sunday dinners and would actually help with dishes and play with Marcus. She seemed to genuinely adore her grandson, always bringing him little gifts and bragging about him to her friends. "That boy is going to be something special," she'd say. She even defended him once when another kid's parent complained about Marcus scoring too many goals in a recreational soccer game. But somewhere around Marcus's 8th birthday, things started to change. David's job became more demanding and he started working longer hours. He missed a few of Marcus's games, then a few school events. When I'd try to talk to him about it, he'd get defensive. "I'm working my butt off to provide for this family," he'd say. "Cut me some slack." The distance grew slowly at first, then faster. Date nights became rare, then non-existent. Family game nights turned into David working on his laptop while Marcus and I played cards. The man who used to read bedtime stories every night started saying he was too tired, too stressed, too busy. That's when Helen started planting her seeds of doubt. Helen started small, the way poison always does. During one of our Sunday dinners, she was looking at Marcus playing in the backyard and said casually, "You know, Sarah, Marcus has such unique features. He doesn't really look like anyone in our family, does he?" I brushed it off at the time, thinking she was just making conversation. But Helen Chen never just made conversation. Comments became more frequent and more pointed. "Marcus is so tall for his age. That's certainly not from the Chen side." Or, "Those eyes of his are so unusual. I wonder where he gets them from." She'd say these things with that sweet grandmother smile, but there was something calculating behind her words that made my stomach turn. David started pulling away from both Marcus and me around this time. He'd come home from work exhausted and irritable, barely acknowledging when Marcus ran to hug him at the door. Weekend soccer games became obligations rather than joy. When Marcus scored goals, David would clap politely instead of cheering like he used to. The man who once filmed every single one of Marcus's achievements stopped bringing his phone to games altogether. Our marriage counseling sessions became battlegrounds. David would sit there with his arms crossed, acting like showing up was enough effort. When our therapist asked him to describe what he loved about our family, he'd give these generic answers about providing stability instead of talking about the actual people he was supposed to love. I started going to sessions alone, trying to figure out how to save a marriage where I was the only one fighting. The divorce proceedings were brutal. David's lawyer pushed for minimal child support and limited custody, which shocked me because David had always been so involved in Marcus's life. But what really broke my heart was watching David during those meetings. He sat there stone-faced while lawyers discussed his son like he was a financial burden instead of a human being. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, David's behavior took a dark turn. It started during a custody exchange when Marcus ran up to show his dad a soccer trophy he'd won. Instead of congratulating him, David barely glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Marcus." But it was the way he said it, cold and distant, like he was talking to a stranger's kid. Then came the comments that still make my blood boil. During one pickup, Marcus was excitedly telling David about a goal he'd scored, and David cut him off with, "You sure don't look like me when you play. I was never that aggressive." Marcus's face fell, and he stopped talking for the rest of the car ride. Helen escalated things during a particularly tense custody exchange. Marcus had just gotten a haircut, and she looked at him critically before announcing, "That boy looks nothing like our family. Absolutely nothing. David's wasting his time and money." She said this right in front of Marcus, who was standing there holding his overnight bag just trying to spend time with his dad. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the DNA hearing. Marcus had his school play. He was playing a tree in the environmental awareness production, and he was so proud of his costume. I'd helped him practice his one line for weeks. "I provide oxygen for all living things." He'd been asking David about it for days, reminding him of the date and time. The night of the play, Marcus kept looking toward the auditorium doors, waiting for his dad to arrive. I sat in the 3rd row, saving a seat that stayed empty. After the performance, while other kids were getting congratulated by both parents, Marcus found me backstage with tears in his eyes. "Where's Daddy?" he asked. I called David that night after Marcus went to bed. "How could you miss his play?" I demanded. His response still haunts me. "Sarah, I'm done raising a kid that's not mine. I've been thinking about this for months, and the math doesn't add up. Look at him. Really, look at him. He doesn't look like me. He doesn't act like me. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder if he's even mine." I was so shocked I could barely speak. "David, what are you talking about? Marcus is your son." "Is he, though? My mother's been asking the same questions, and she's right. Why should I keep paying for a kid who might not even be mine?" What David didn't know was that Marcus had picked up the extension phone upstairs to call his friend about homework. He heard every single word of that conversation. My 12-year-old son heard his father say he was done raising him and question whether he was really his child. That night, Marcus crawled into my bed crying. "Mommy, doesn't Daddy love me anymore?" After that devastating phone call, I knew I couldn't let this continue. My son was being emotionally destroyed by his own father's doubts, and I had to act. The next morning, while Marcus was at school, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to my sister Emma, who's a paralegal in downtown Denver. Through tears, I told her everything. Helen's comments, David's behavior, and most importantly, what Marcus had overheard. Emma didn't hesitate. "Sarah, you need to get ahead of this. If David's planning to challenge paternity, you need legal representation immediately. I know exactly who you should call." That's how I found Jennifer Walsh, a family law attorney who specialized in custody disputes. Jennifer was tough but compassionate, a woman in her 40s who'd built her career defending mothers and children in exactly these situations. During our first meeting, she listened to everything without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "Here's what's going to happen," Jennifer said, setting down her pen. "David's going to file for a paternity test to try to get out of child support. His mother is probably encouraging this because she sees it as a way to cut ties with you permanently. But here's the thing, Sarah. If you're telling me the truth and Marcus is David's biological son, then we're going to prove it definitively and make sure David can never use this weapon against your child again." I hired Jennifer that day, using money from my teacher's retirement fund. It was every penny I had saved, but protecting Marcus was worth going broke. The hardest part was preparing Marcus for what was coming. That evening, I sat him down in our living room, the same spot where David used to read him bedtime stories. I chose my words carefully, knowing that how I handled this conversation would affect him for the rest of his life. "Marcus, you know how Daddy has been acting differently lately?" I began. He nodded, not making eye contact. "Well, sometimes when grown-ups get divorced, they get confused and say things they don't really mean. Daddy is having some of those confused feelings right now." "Is it because of something I did wrong?" Marcus asked, and my heart shattered. "No, baby, this has nothing to do with you. You are perfect exactly as you are. But we're going to have to prove to a judge that you're Daddy's son, just to make sure there's no more confusion." Marcus looked up at me with those wise brown eyes. "Mom, I know I'm his son. I remember when he taught me to tie my shoes, and when he carried me on his shoulders at the zoo, and when he said I was brave after I got stitches. Dads don't do that for kids who aren't theirs, right?" I hugged him so tight, wondering how my 12-year-old had more wisdom than the adults in this situation. While preparing our case, I became a detective in my own life. I gathered evidence that Jennifer said would be crucial, not just for the paternity test, but to show the court how David's behavior was affecting Marcus. I collected hundreds of photos spanning 12 years. David in the delivery room holding newborn Marcus, family vacations, birthday parties, soccer games where David was cheering in the stands. I found text messages from just months earlier where David bragged to his friends about Marcus's athletic abilities. There was one to his college buddy that read, "Marcus scored the winning goal today. Kid's got natural talent. Definitely got my competitive spirit." I screenshot everything. Most importantly, I documented the recent cruel behavior. I kept a journal of every hurtful comment, every missed event, every time Marcus asked why Daddy didn't want to play with him anymore. Jennifer said this would show the court that David's sudden paternity doubts were about avoiding responsibility, not genuine concerns. 3 weeks before the hearing, something interesting happened. David sent me a text after Marcus's soccer game. "Marcus scored 2 goals today. He's the best thing I ever made." I stared at that message for a long time. Even while publicly denying paternity, David couldn't help feeling proud of his son in private moments. I showed the text to Marcus because I wanted him to know that somewhere inside, his father still loved him. Marcus read it twice, then looked at me with the expression I'd never seen before. Not sadness or confusion, but determination. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come to the court hearing? I think there are some things I need to say." That's when I knew my son was ready to fight for himself. The courtroom felt Arctic cold that Tuesday morning in March. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over Family Court Division 3, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every family drama imaginable. The lab technician from Colorado Genetics sat at a small table near the judge's bench, holding a manila envelope that contained 12 years of David's fatherhood in black and white percentages. David's lawyer, Robert Sterling, was a sharp-dressed man who specialized in helping fathers escape child support obligations. He stood confidently as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client has legitimate concerns about the paternity of the minor child. Physical characteristics, behavioral patterns, and timeline inconsistencies have raised reasonable doubts that require scientific verification." I wanted to scream. Timeline inconsistencies? Marcus was born exactly 9 months after our anniversary weekend in Vail. But I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, watching this stranger reduce my son to timeline inconsistencies. Helen sat in the gallery directly behind David, wearing her best church dress and that satisfied expression she got whenever she thought she was winning. She'd even brought a small purse with tissues, as if she expected to need them for tears of relief when her plan succeeded. Jennifer stood to present our case. "Your Honor, this is a frivolous challenge motivated by the defendant's desire to avoid financial responsibility. We have extensive documentation of Mr. Chen's acknowledgement of paternity, including recent text messages expressing pride in his son's achievements." That's when she pulled out the printed screenshots of David's text messages, including the one from 3 weeks ago. David's face went pale as Jennifer read it aloud. "Marcus scored 2 goals today. He's the best thing I ever made." Objection! David's lawyer jumped up. That text was taken out of context and doesn't constitute legal acknowledgement of paternity. Judge Morrison was not impressed. Overruled, the court will consider all evidence of the defendant's previous acknowledgement of the father-child relationship. The lab technician was instructed to open the envelope containing the DNA results. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of paper rustling. Marcus sat next to me, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. The results show, the technician began, adjusting his glasses, that there is a 99.9% probability that David Chen is the biological father of Marcus Collins Chen. The words hung in the air like smoke. David stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Helen's satisfied expression cracked, replaced by something that looked like panic. But before anyone could react further, Marcus stood up. At 12 years old, he looked so small in that big courtroom, but his voice was clear and steady when he spoke. "Excuse me, Your Honor?" Judge Morrison looked surprised. "Yes, young man." Marcus turned to face his father directly. The entire courtroom held its breath. "Dad, if you really think I'm not your son, then why did you text Mom 3 weeks ago saying I'm the best thing you ever made?" Court reporter's fingers froze over her stenograph machine. She literally stopped typing mid-sentence, staring at this 12-year-old boy who had just delivered the most devastating cross-examination of the day. David's mouth opened and closed like he was drowning. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear under the defense table. Helen gripped her purse so tightly I thought she might tear the handles off. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, the same phone where he'd read that text message 3 weeks earlier. "You sent this to Mom after my soccer game. You were proud of me. You called me the best thing you ever made. So either you were lying then, or you're lying now. Which is it, Dad?" The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Judge Morrison leaned forward, clearly impressed by what she was witnessing. Even the bailiff was staring. David finally found his voice, but it came out as a whisper. "Marcus, because I remember everything, Dad." Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger. "I remember when you taught me to ride a bike and you ran behind me for 2 hours until I got it right. I remember when I was scared of monsters under my bed and you checked every night for 3 months. I remember when you said I was your little champion after my first soccer goal. Were you lying about all of that too?" David broke. Right there in open court, this 36-year-old man started crying like a child. Helen looked horrified, realizing her manipulation had not only failed, but had been exposed by her own grandson. Judge Morrison had seen enough. Judge Morrison didn't need to deliberate long. After Marcus's devastating testimony, she called a 15-minute recess. When we returned, her decision was swift and final. Given the evidence presented, including the confirmed paternity results and the minor child's testimony regarding his father's contradictory behavior, I'm awarding primary custody to the mother with supervised visitation for the father. Mr. Chen, your actions have caused significant emotional harm to your son, and until you can demonstrate consistent, loving behavior, your visits will be monitored by a court-appointed supervisor. David's breakdown in that courtroom wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of his reckoning. As we walked out of the courthouse, he followed us into the hallway, tears still streaming down his face. "Marcus, please," he called out. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Marcus stopped walking and turned around. For a moment, I thought he might run to his father like he used to. Instead, he looked David straight in the eye and said words that still give me chills. "Real dads don't try to throw their kids away, even when they're angry or scared. You forgot that you were supposed to protect me, not hurt me." Then he took my hand and we walked away, leaving David standing there in that courthouse hallway, finally understanding what he'd lost. Helen tried to approach us at the parking garage, but Marcus was done with her too. When she started to say something about family healing, he cut her off. "You're the one who told Dad I wasn't his. You wanted to get rid of me. Stay away from us." At 12 years old, my son had more strength than most adults I know. The first few months after the hearing were rough. David's supervised visits happened every other Saturday at the Family Resource Center downtown. A social worker named Mrs. Rodriguez would sit nearby while David and Marcus, awkwardly tried to rebuild what David had destroyed. Marcus went because the court ordered it, but his heart wasn't in it. He'd come home from those visits quiet and tired, like he'd been carrying a heavy weight all day. But something unexpected started happening around month 4. David began showing up to those visits with apology letters he'd written to Marcus during the week. Not texts or emails, but actual handwritten letters on notebook paper. In them, he'd acknowledge specific ways he'd hurt Marcus and take responsibility for his actions. He started therapy. Real therapy, not just anger management classes the court required. The breakthrough came 6 months after the hearing. Marcus scored the winning goal in his soccer championship game, and when he looked up at the stands, David was there. Not for his scheduled visit, not because the court made him, but because he'd driven there after work just to watch his son play. When Marcus saw him, he didn't wave or smile, but he didn't look away either. After the game, David approached carefully. "Great goal, champ," he said quietly. "You've gotten so much better since I last watched you play." Marcus considered this for a moment, then said, "Thanks. Coach says I need to work on my left foot more." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a tentative first step toward something that might eventually become trust again. Today, 2 years later, our relationship with David is complicated but healing. Marcus chooses to spend some weekends with his father now, though the visits are no longer supervised. David never misses a soccer game, and he's learning to be the father he should have been all along. He's also learning that earning back trust takes much longer than breaking it. Helen, on the other hand, has been cut out of our lives completely. Marcus made that decision himself, and I support it. Some relationships can't be repaired, especially when the person refuses to acknowledge the harm they've caused. The most important lesson I learned through this nightmare is that children are far more resilient and wise than we give them credit for. Marcus not only survived his father's betrayal, he stood up to it with courage that shamed every adult in that courtroom. He taught me that sometimes the people we're supposed to protect end up protecting us instead. And if you're going through something similar, remember this: your child's worth isn't determined by the people who question it. DNA tests can prove biology, but love, consistency, and courage prove family. Marcus knows exactly who he is, regardless of what anyone else thinks, and that's the greatest gift I could ever give him. Marcus is now 14, and he's thriving. He made varsity soccer as a freshman, maintains a 4.0 GPA, and has grown into the kind of young man who stands up for what's right, just like he did in that courtroom 2 years ago. He's taught me that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals, or if you know someone who needs to hear Marcus's message about standing up for yourself, please hit that like button. Your support means everything to creators like me who are sharing real stories about real families. And listen, I know some of you watching this might be going through your own custody battles, dealing with toxic family members, or questioning whether you're strong enough to protect your children from the people who are supposed to love them. If that's you, please leave a comment below. Share your story, ask for advice, or just let us know you're not alone. This community is here for you, and sometimes knowing that one other person understands can make all the difference. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because every week we're sharing stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when life tested them. Stories about mothers who fought impossible battles, children who showed wisdom beyond their years, and families who proved that love really can conquer all, even when it takes time, patience, and a whole lot of courage. Your story matters too, and we want to hear it. Until next time, remember what Marcus taught us. You are worthy of love, respect, and protection, and anyone who makes you question that isn't worthy of a place in your life. Take care of each other out there.